The first light of dawn filtered weakly through a haze of smoke and dust, casting long, trembling shadows across the village outskirts. It was the kind of morning that felt heavy, almost suffocating, where every sound seemed magnified. The distant clatter of armor, the faint rustling of leaves, the nervous whispers of those who had gathered for protection. At the edge of the village, standing with an unwavering posture, despite the early tension, was the girl. Her clothes were practical and worn, patched from battles past, a mixture of leather and cloth that allowed movement without restriction. Dirt streaked her face, but the eyes that scanned the horizon were sharp, bright, and unyielding. She had faced many dangers before, each leaving its mark on her body and mind. Scars crisscrossed her arms and hands, remnants of past skirmishes, where survival had depended on speed, instinct, and courage. But the lines etched across her face spoke not only of the physical, but of the mental discipline required to endure such relentless hardship. She wasn't just trained in combat. She had learned the art of patience, of observation, of calculating risk with almost unnatural precision. To the villagers, she was more than a fighter. She was a shield, a strategist, a symbol of hope against forces that seemed unstoppable. Her crossbow leaned against a broken fence post nearby. It was ordinary to the casual observer, a simple weapon of wood and steel, but she had spent countless hours perfecting its aim, adjusting its tension, and learning the subtle shifts of its balance. Today, however, she would not rely on the ordinary alone. Today demanded something extraordinary. In her mind, she traced the enemy's approach, recalling their numbers, formations, and likely strategies. The distance was deceptive, the clamor of their advance carried on the wind, masking the precise strength and organization of their forces. She could almost feel them moving like a single organism, confident, disciplined, unyielding. The villagers clustered behind her, faces pale, eyes wide, and hands trembling. Mothers held children close, men gripped crude weapons, and elders watched silently, praying and hoping that their guardian could withstand the coming storm. The girl's presence alone calmed them, though the tension in the air was thick enough to choke. She did not speak much. Her eyes, gestures, and measured breaths conveyed a command that words could never capture. Yet her thoughts raced faster than the whispering wind. She had been preparing for moments like this all her life, not only the physical preparation, but the mental endurance that separated survival from defeat. Memories flickered across her mind, battles in distant towns, the echoes of screams, the sting of arrows, the weight of responsibility when others depended on her to survive. She had once been like the villagers, afraid, inexperienced, unsure of how to confront overwhelming odds. But necessity had forged her into something sharper, something more precise, something that could think clearly when chaos threatened to consume everything. Each scar on her body told a story of calculated risk, of instincts honed to near perfection, of moments where hesitation could have meant death. Today, she would test herself once again against a foe that promised destruction. A sudden clatter from the edge of the village drew her attention. She turned, eyes narrowing, noting a young boy tripping over a loose board while fleeing toward the center of the village. A flicker of irritation passed her features, quickly replaced by calm. She motioned him back to safety with a subtle wave of her hand. "Not today," she seemed to say. Her gaze returned to the horizon, where the enemy advanced, their numbers now visible through the morning mist. Horses kicked up dust, banners flapped in the wind, and the first faint shouts reached her ears. They were confident, as they always were before a battle. That confidence would be their first mistake. She walked slowly along the perimeter, checking barricades, noting weak points in the village defenses. Every detail mattered: the placement of heavy stones, the angle of the gates, the trajectory of arrows that could rain down on advancing enemies. She crouched briefly behind a low wall, pressing her fingers against its cold, rough surface, feeling its strength and flaws. She whispered instructions to herself, envisioning each stage of the conflict, where she would strike first, where the villagers could provide cover, how to exploit enemy overconfidence. Every element was part of a larger plan, one that demanded patience and courage in equal measure. Her mind wandered briefly to the crossbow. It had been with her for years, a loyal companion through countless skirmishes. Unlike the gun she had carried once, the crossbow required skill, timing, and precision. But she trusted it implicitly, and today it would serve as more than a simple tool of war. Beneath the ordinary bolts, she had hidden the extraordinary, explosives carefully crafted to strike fear and chaos into the hearts of the enemy. The knowledge of its power made her pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the thrill of preparation. The moment of action was near. The villagers, sensing her confidence, began to straighten their posture. Mothers clutched their children less tightly, men lifted their heads, and even the elders allowed themselves a flicker of hope. They did not understand the details of her plan, nor did they need to. They knew that wherever she went, strategy and courage followed. She was not reckless. She was calculated, and she had lived long enough to understand the cost of failure. Her reputation was not born from stories, but from deeds, and deeds carried weight far heavier than words. She paused to survey the horizon one last time, before the sun rose fully. The enemy's banners now gleamed faintly in the morning light, a sea of color and menace. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the cold air that carried the scent of dust, smoke, and distant fire. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. Every decision she would make in the next hours could mean life or death, not just for her, but for every soul in the village. Yet she felt no hesitation. She had been forged by fire, honed by loss, and tempered by necessity. A lone bird cried from a nearby tree, its voice slicing through the tension. The girl smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, recognizing the moment's irony. Nature continued, indifferent to human conflict, while the fate of hundreds rested on her shoulders. She crouched beside her crossbow, fingertips brushing the bolts, feeling the lethal potential within. Every instinct screamed readiness, every muscle tensed with anticipation. The villagers, sensing the change, tightened their ranks, drawing courage from her calm determination. She would face the storm, and she would bend it to her will. Minutes stretched like hours as the enemy drew ever closer. Dust swirled around the village edges, the sound of distant drums, hooves, and shouted orders growing steadily louder. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself, recalling her training, the battles she had survived, the moments when fear had almost consumed her, but had been conquered by focus. She opened her eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanning the horizon once more. The calm before the storm had ended. The battle was about to begin, and she was ready. With a swift, decisive motion, she picked up her crossbow and notched a bolt. Ordinary for now, but symbolic of the control she wielded over the chaos to come. Her movements were precise, deliberate, every gesture radiating confidence and authority. Around her, the villagers watched in quiet awe, sensing that the fate of the day rested in her hands. The girl had faced countless dangers before, yet this one felt different. The stakes were higher, the enemy fiercer, and the potential for both triumph and disaster more profound than ever. And so she waited, poised at the edge of the village, crossbow in hand, every sense alert, every instinct ready. The enemy approached, oblivious to the storm that would break upon them, and the girl, battle-hardened and unyielding, prepared to step into the fray. She was more than a fighter. She was a force, a guardian, and soon the battlefield itself would bear witness to her courage, skill, and daring. The enemy had grown larger in her view, their ranks stretching like a living wall across the distant fields. Their banners snapped in the morning wind, bright and defiant, each symbol a testament to the strength they believed they wielded. The girls' eyes narrowed, scanning their formation with meticulous care. They moved with coordination, every step calculated, every horse and soldier trained to follow orders without question. Confidence radiated from them in waves, a stark contrast to the nervous energy that clung to the villagers behind her. But she had faced confidence before, and had learned how fragile it could be when it met skill, preparation, and surprise. The clatter of hooves grew louder, resonating across the dirt and stone, carrying a rhythm that pulsed with impending violence. She could almost read their discipline in the cadence, the slow, deliberate stomp of the front lines, the faint clink of armor, the occasional cry of officers giving orders. She crouched behind the remains of a low stone wall, pressing her palms against its cool, rough surface, feeling the subtle vibrations of the earth beneath her. Each vibration spoke to her foreshadowing movements, signaling hesitations, betraying gaps in formations that most eyes would overlook. Every detail mattered. Today, small miscalculations could cascade into catastrophic consequences. Nearby, the villagers trembled. Women clutched their children, men gripped hastily armed tools and swords, and the elders whispered prayers under their breath. Their fear was tangible, a living presence that hung in the air like smoke. She didn't turn to reassure them with words. Her stance alone communicated authority. A subtle tilt of her head, a measured breath, a hand resting lightly on her crossbow. It all spoke of preparation, control, and readiness. They might not understand the intricacies of strategy or the nuances of warfare, but they recognized courage when they saw it. They knew they were not alone. She crouched lower, assessing the terrain between the village and the approaching enemy. Fields lay broken and uneven, dotted with fallen trees, shallow ditches, and scattered boulders. Each feature could be leveraged for defense, each one a potential trap. She whispered to herself, mapping out zones of engagement, where archers could hold, where villagers could seek cover, and where she could strike to maximize impact. Her mind moved like a chessboard, plotting several moves ahead, predicting the enemy's reactions, considering contingencies for every possible outcome. Each breath she drew tightened her focus. Each heartbeat measured time until the clash. Her instincts prickled as a small contingent of enemy scouts broke from the main line, moving swiftly and silently through the mist. Their presence was meant to intimidate, to test the village's defenses. She watched them carefully, noting their formation, their speed, and their confidence. With a swift motion, she directed two villagers, barely older than children, to set small, concealed traps, pitfalls, and tripwires designed to slow or unbalance the intruders. She was teaching them courage through action, reinforcing the idea that every small effort counted, that even the smallest hand could influence the flow of battle. The scouts paused, sensing resistance, though they had not yet realized the extent of the trap. Suddenly, one of the villagers, a young man clutching a crude spear, lost his footing on the uneven ground and stumbled forward. The girl reacted instantly, leaping to his side, steadying him with a firm hand. "Focus," she murmured, her voice calm but carrying authority. He nodded, fear still evident in his eyes, but tempered by her composure. She returned her attention to the horizon. The main force had drawn closer, and the air vibrated with tension. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, carrying the faint smell of dust, sweat, and something metallic, a harbinger of conflict. Every instinct she had trained in her life was on high alert. A sudden gust of wind brought the first distinct sounds of enemy preparations. The clanking of metal, commands shouted in firm tones, and the occasional neigh of horses. Her heart rate accelerated, not with fear, but with anticipation. She had learned that a clear mind in moments like these was as important as a sharp weapon. Panic, once it took root, spread faster than the deadliest contagion. She would not allow panic to take hold, neither in herself, nor in those who looked to her for leadership. Every movement, every signal, every silent calculation reinforced her control over the unfolding chaos. The scouts had now returned to the main ranks, carrying back reports that likely underestimated the village's defenses. Their overconfidence played perfectly into her strategy. She studied the enemy's numbers, realizing that sheer force alone would not prevail. The only way to protect the village was to exploit their arrogance, to turn their precision and discipline into liability. She visualized the sequence of events she would orchestrate. Small explosions here, a sudden trap there, arrows raining from concealed positions, forcing the enemy to falter. She had learned that the mind of the opponent could be as fragile as their bodies. She could manipulate fear and hesitation to her advantage. A distant shout reached her ears, and she instinctively ducked behind the stone wall. Some of the villagers gasped, frightened by the sudden sound, but she pressed a finger to her lips, signaling calm. Her eyes flicked from one vulnerable point to another, calculating, anticipating. Every breath, every heartbeat, every subtle movement of the enemy could inform her next action. She adjusted her crossbow slightly, testing its tension and feel. Each notch of the bolt brought a satisfying click, a reminder that she was prepared to unleash far more than ordinary attacks. Soon, the battlefield would bend to her will, and she would ensure that the enemy's confidence became their undoing. Despite the rising tension, the girl allowed herself a brief moment to observe her surroundings. The village, with its broken fences, makeshift barricades, and humble homes, stood quiet, almost fragile against the impending storm. Yet she saw potential in every narrow alley, every scattered stone, every slight elevation in the ground. With careful planning and precise timing, these imperfections would become assets. She envisioned herself moving swiftly between positions, exploiting the terrain, guiding her allies, and creating chaos among the enemy ranks. Every small detail mattered. Every second counted. The villagers shifted nervously behind her, sensing the approaching threat. Some whispered prayers, others clutched their weapons tighter, but all looked toward her. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the rising panic around her, and that contrast was deliberate. She had learned that confidence was contagious, and she needed the villagers to believe in their own ability to survive, at least enough to follow her lead. The line between survival and despair often rested on perception. Today, she would ensure that hope carried them through the storm. The enemy's advance continued, their formation a relentless tide of boots, armor, and banners. The girl's mind worked at lightning speed, anticipating each maneuver, predicting every potential counter. She had fought similar forces before, but this enemy possessed a dangerous combination of discipline and arrogance. Both qualities could be exploited if handled correctly. She marked zones in her mind where small traps would slow their progress, where concentrated fire could disorient them, and where she could position herself to strike decisively. Timing would be everything. Her eyes flicked momentarily to the crossbow at her side. She had prepared ordinary bolts for this initial engagement, enough to test and harry the enemy. But the real weapon's explosive bolts, crafted with care and precision, remained concealed for the decisive moment. She had saved them for the instant when the enemy's confidence peaked, when panic would have the maximum effect. That moment was approaching, and she felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. Not fear, not hesitation, but pure, focused readiness. The wind shifted again, carrying distant shouts and the faint metallic smell of weapons. The enemy had reached the first natural choke points in the terrain, and their scouts had begun probing cautiously. The girl assessed quickly, and decided it was time to engage subtly. She raised her crossbow, aimed at the lead scout who moved too confidently, and released an ordinary bolt. It struck with precision, not to kill but to startle. The scout stumbled, the formation wavered ever so slightly, and a ripple of confusion began. The first crack in the enemy's armor of confidence had appeared, small but significant. Around her, the villagers reacted. Some flinched at the sudden action, others cheered softly, emboldened by the girl's decisive movement. She allowed herself a tiny smile. It was enough. The first engagement, subtle yet impactful, had shifted the psychological balance of the battlefield. The enemy, though vast and confident, had been reminded that the village was defended not by chance, but by a mind far sharper than they had anticipated. Tension rose on both sides, the enemy's anxiety barely concealed beneath disciplined masks, and the villagers' fear tempered with a growing, fragile hope. The girl lowered her crossbow briefly, scanning the field again. Every detail mattered: the spacing of soldiers, the direction of cavalry, the slightest hesitation among officers. She calculated potential weaknesses, noting where she could exploit gaps, where small traps would amplify chaos, and where her allies could safely engage. Her mind was a battlefield in itself, mapping possibilities, contingencies, and probabilities. She had learned that preparation often outweighed brute force. Today, strategy and timing would determine survival. The enemy continued to advance, but the subtle disruption had slowed their rhythm. Horses veered slightly, soldiers adjusted their pace, and officers shouted corrections that arrived too late. The girl observed, waiting for the perfect moment to escalate her intervention. She knew she had to maintain composure. One misstep could turn hesitation into panic for her allies, or worse, expose them to lethal attack. Every heartbeat was a calculation, every breath a measure of timing, every glance a silent order. And so, as the enemy drew ever closer, the girl crouched, poised and ready. Her hands rested on her crossbow, her mind a whirlwind of strategy, observation, and anticipation. Around her, the villagers held their positions, waiting, trusting, trembling, but determined. The calm before the storm had shifted. The storm itself was nearly upon them. Yet she felt no fear, only the thrill of preparation and the certainty that, with precision, courage, and timing, the tide could be turned. The first clash was inevitable. The enemy, emboldened by numbers and the rhythmic march of their disciplined formation, finally reached the outskirts of the village. Dust swirled around their boots and hooves, rising in pale clouds that obscured vision and added a ghostly haze to the battlefield. The girl crouched behind a stone barricade, her crossbow raised and ready, eyes darting from one approaching figure to another, noting every movement, every subtle hesitation. Her muscles tensed like coiled springs. She knew that once the battle began, there would be no margin for error. The enemy struck with confidence, expecting minimal resistance from a small village they assumed weak and unprepared. But the girl's presence and preparation defied their assumptions. She moved like a shadow, her body low and silent, slipping between cover and concealment. The first bolts flew from her crossbow, striking with precision. Each one was aimed not just to wound, but to disrupt. Horses veered, soldiers staggered, and officers barked orders that were drowned in the chaos she orchestrated. The enemy had expected resistance, but not a fighter who could think 10 steps ahead while under fire. Around her, the villagers fought as best they could, inspired by her example. Men with crude swords and spears held their ground, women threw rocks or poured boiling water from rooftops, and even children darted along the edges to assist in small, dangerous ways. The girl's strategy was not only to engage the enemy physically, but psychologically. Every sound, every arrow, every deliberate misstep she forced in the enemy ranks planted seeds of doubt. Confidence wavered where it had once been absolute. Panic was not yet visible, but it was simmering beneath disciplined masks, and she could feel it. The first soldier to reach the barricade lunged at her with a sword, confident in his speed and strength. She sidestepped with a fluid motion, letting his momentum carry him past, and slashed the blade across his leg, sending him sprawling. Another soldier, seeing their comrade falter, raised his shield, but she had already calculated his angle. She fired a bolt with a sharp click, striking just above the knee joint and toppling him without bloodshed. It was precision over brutality, control over chaos, and the enemy began to hesitate, a dangerous fissure in their once perfect formation. Small explosions from concealed traps set earlier erupted along the flanks. Logs toppled, stones shifted, and hidden pits swallowed cavalry hooves, unbalancing riders and causing minor collisions. The girl's eyes darted across the battlefield, adjusting tactics in real time. She gestured subtly, directing villagers to fire arrows from unexpected angles, to block certain paths, and to create visual distractions. The chaos was deliberate. Every misstep was part of her plan. The enemy had underestimated the terrain, underestimated the villagers' resolve, and most importantly, underestimated her. She moved through the battlefield like a ghost, ducking behind walls, slipping through narrow alleys, peering where least expected. Her presence alone unsettled the enemy. Soldiers who had been confident moments before now hesitated, scanning for threats that moved faster than their ability to react. The girl's crossbow became an extension of her mind, firing bolts with precision that matched her thoughts. Each strike was a calculated disruption, a psychological blow that compounded the physical chaos. By the time she reloaded, the enemy was already reacting to the consequences of her previous shots. Despite the tension, her mind remained clear. She scanned constantly, noting shifts in the enemy formation, timing her shots, and predicting their next moves. One officer, attempting to rally a small squad, found his commands drowned out by the cacophony she had orchestrated. A well-aimed bolt struck the standard-bearer, and the banner fell, causing confusion and a ripple of hesitation. The girl smiled faintly under her dirt-streaked face. She had predicted this effect, and it had unfolded precisely. Confidence faltered further, and with every second, the villagers' morale strengthened. A horse bolted nearby, dragging its rider into a wall, and the girl seized the opportunity. She moved swiftly to the scene, firing another bolt to distract the remaining soldiers in the area. They scattered, unsure where to focus, and she slipped through the chaos to strike again at the most critical points of the formation. Each action was a blend of instinct, training, and strategy. The battlefield was no longer just a place of brute force. It had become a chessboard, with the girl moving pieces with near-perfect foresight. The villagers were no longer mere spectators. Their courage grew as the girl's actions inspired them. Men wielding farm tools became warriors, their swings more precise, their movements more deliberate. Women used whatever they could find: stones, boiling water, even fire, to disrupt enemy advances. Children, careful and quiet, assisted where possible, running messages, carrying small supplies, and moving in ways that did not endanger them but contributed to the fight. The girl's presence created a ripple effect. Her focus and composure were contagious. The enemy began to adjust, attempting to restore order, but the girl anticipated their corrections. Each adjustment they made opened new opportunities for disruption. She fired bolts at precise intervals, creating a rhythm that disoriented the enemy further. Horses veered unexpectedly, soldiers collided, and commands were delayed. The psychological impact was becoming visible. Hesitation, uncertainty, and fear began to ripple through their ranks. Confidence was a fragile thing, and she was expertly exploiting its cracks. Despite the chaos, she remained acutely aware of her allies' safety. No victory was worth unnecessary casualties. She signaled where to hold, where to retreat momentarily, and where to advance with purpose. Her movements were both offensive and defensive, blending strategy with protection. One particularly aggressive enemy soldier lunged toward a group of villagers. She intercepted with a calculated strike from her crossbow, wounding but not killing, causing the attacker to stumble and retreat. Every action was precise, controlled, and purposeful. The first hour of battle was a blur of motion, sound, and chaos. Bolts flew, debris scattered, and the ground trembled under the force of combat. Yet through it all, the girl's mind remained a calm, calculating force. She adjusted constantly, thinking 10 steps ahead, predicting enemy reactions, and countering before they could act. Each success reinforced her allies' courage and further destabilized the enemy's confidence. They had expected an easy victory, but instead, they faced a fighter who was unpredictable, lethal, and in complete control of the battlefield. At one point, an enemy officer charged toward her directly, clearly frustrated by the disruption she had caused. She didn't flinch. Instead, she sidestepped, used his momentum against him, and discharged a bolt that struck the wall beside him with a sharp explosion of force. He staggered back, momentarily stunned, and she pressed the advantage, moving with fluid grace to keep him off balance. Her presence, her skill, her audacity, every movement reinforced her dominance over the battlefield. Small eruptions of chaos spread across the enemy ranks. Horses veered into each other, soldiers collided, and officers shouted orders that fell on distracted ears. The girl moved tirelessly, appearing where needed, disappearing when threatened, and always dictating the pace of engagement. She had turned the tide without yet revealing her ultimate weapon. Every minor victory, every disruption, every strategically timed strike built toward the moment when she would unleash the decisive blow. Around her, villagers followed her lead with growing confidence. Even those who had initially hidden in fear now engaged more boldly, inspired by her courage and clarity. Their actions, though small individually, collectively magnified her effectiveness. The battlefield was no longer a simple matter of numbers. It was a psychological war, and she was winning. Fear, hesitation, and disarray were spreading through the enemy ranks, just as she had predicted. By the time the first clash reached its peak intensity, the girl had accomplished something remarkable. She had turned a predictable confrontation into a controlled chaos, a battlefield where the enemy's confidence crumbled under the weight of her strategy. She had tested their formation, their discipline, and their readiness, and every move had reinforced her dominance. The first confrontation was not merely a fight. It was a demonstration of her skill, her intellect, and her ability to lead under extreme pressure. And yet, as she paused for a brief breath behind a barricade, she knew this was only the beginning. The enemy would regroup, reassess, and press again. Her ultimate challenge, the moment when ordinary bolts would give way to extraordinary measures, was still ahead. But for now, she had won the first round, setting the stage for what would soon become a decisive battle. The villagers watched, emboldened, inspired, and ready to follow her lead, as the girl prepared to step further into legend. The first clash had been a test, a skirmish to gauge strength, patience, and strategy. The girl wiped sweat and dust from her brow, her chest heaving, muscles trembling from exertion, yet her mind remained sharp, calculating, and ruthless in its clarity. She crouched behind a battered wall, scanning the battlefield where smoke mingled with dust and the faint cries of wounded. Soldiers and panicked horses echoed in the morning air. The enemy, though momentarily disrupted, was not vanquished. Their numbers still dwarfed the villagers, their confidence bruised, but far from broken. She knew the pivotal moment was approaching, the point at which hesitation would no longer suffice. Her crossbow rested lightly in her hands, a symbol of control and precision. She had used the ordinary bolts to disrupt, to test, and to sow the first seeds of chaos, but they were no longer enough. She could see the enemy reordering, attempting to recover from the initial disruption, and she understood that their discipline, though shaken, could be restored if allowed the opportunity. Her mind raced. She weighed the risks, calculated the odds, and realized there was only one decisive action that could ensure victory, and it carried immense danger. Hidden beneath the ordinary bolts were her true weapons. Explosive bolts, meticulously crafted to maximize disruption, panic, and fear. They were dangerous not only to the enemy, but potentially to our allies if misused. She had saved them for this exact moment, the point where hesitation could spell disaster for her village. Her fingers traced the grooves of the bolts, each one a promise of controlled chaos, a calculated gamble against the enemy's overwhelming numbers. The choice was stark: act decisively and risk everything, or continue the skirmish with conventional attacks and hope that strategy alone could hold the tide. The battlefield was a chaotic tableau of clashing forces. Horses reared, soldiers shouted orders, and arrows whistled through the air, some finding marks, others harmlessly embedding in dirt or wood. Villagers moved with newfound courage, yet fear lingered, a constant shadow over their efforts. The girl moved among them, eyes sharp, issuing silent signals with gestures, nods, and subtle shifts in posture. Every movement was deliberate, a controlled message to allies and a warning to enemies. But the limits of ordinary action were apparent. The enemy's regrouping was swift, their officers' commands slicing through the disarray, slowly knitting the formation back together. She considered the consequences carefully. One misfire, one miscalculation, and the explosive bolts could harm her allies, destroy parts of the village, or even backfire against herself. But inaction carried its own danger. The enemy would regroup fully, their confidence restored, and the village would be overrun. Her jaw tightened. She could not afford hesitation. She had been forged by countless battles, each demanding split-second decisions where the margin between life and death was razor thin. Today was no different. Today demanded courage, precision, and audacity. She crouched lower, inhaling deeply to steady herself. Her eyes flicked across the battlefield, noting the positions of the enemy's key forces, the gaps in their formation, and the locations of her allies. Every detail mattered. The ordinary bolts had done their work. They had created disruption, sown doubt, and tested reactions, but now it was time to escalate. The explosive bolts were not just weapons. They were instruments of psychological warfare. Their purpose was to turn hesitation into panic, confidence into fear, and a disciplined army into chaos. A brief glance at the villagers reassured her. Though exhausted and frightened, they trusted her implicitly. She had inspired them through action, demonstrating courage, precision, and control. Their morale, fragile but real, would be amplified by the decisive strike she was about to unleash. She knew the importance of timing too early, and the enemy might adapt. Too late, and the village could be overwhelmed. She centered herself, letting instinct, training, and experience converge into a single moment of clarity. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke, dust, and sweat across her senses. She could hear the enemy's officer shouting orders, the disciplined cadence of advancing soldiers, and the uneasy whinny of horses caught in disrupted formations. Every sound informed her strategy. Every motion signaled opportunity or risk. She checked the tension of the crossbow one final time, feeling the familiar weight and balance, the quiet promise of power it contained. The explosive bolts, hidden until now, were carefully loaded, each one perfectly aligned for immediate deployment. Her mind raced through contingencies. What if the enemy anticipated the explosive strike? What if the chaos endangered her allies? What if a misfire ruined everything? Each possibility was assessed, considered, and countered mentally before a single movement was made. She had trained for moments like this, rehearsing actions, responses, and outcomes in her mind countless times. She had survived previous battles not through brute force alone, but through meticulous preparation, rapid adaptation, and the willingness to embrace risk when necessary. A distant scream from the front lines snapped her attention forward. One of the villagers had been caught off guard by an enemy soldier, and she saw the movement of danger threatening to escalate. Without hesitation, she fired an ordinary bolt, striking the assailant and buying a few critical seconds. The girl's mind shifted fluidly between immediate threats and long-term strategy. Every action was measured, deliberate, and purposeful. The explosive bolts were not yet unleashed, but the moment to use them was rapidly approaching. Timing, she knew, was everything. The enemy, sensing the renewed resistance, began to tighten their ranks again. Their movements were faster, more precise, their officers shouting corrections and attempts to restore discipline. But the girl had anticipated this. She adjusted her aim, considering not only the physical placement of the bolts, but the psychological impact they would have. Panic, once seated, spreads faster than any physical weapon. Confidence, once broken, becomes fragile and unpredictable. She would strike at the point where it could create maximum chaos, ensuring the enemy could not recover. Her hands rested lightly on the crossbow, fingertips tracing the grooves of the explosive bolts. She visualized the sequence of deployment, the first bolt to disrupt the center, the second to target the advancing flanks, the third time to coincide with the villagers' coordinated attacks. Each action was rehearsed in her mind, each consequence anticipated. She exhaled slowly, letting adrenaline sharpen her senses rather than cloud them. Her pulse was steady, her vision clear, and her focus unbreakable. A sudden movement on the horizon drew her attention. A squad of enemy scouts attempted to flank the village, moving quickly through the mist and uneven terrain. She adjusted her plan instantaneously, recalculating angles, timing, and sequences. The explosive bolts would not only disrupt the main force, but also prevent the flanking maneuver. She considered the position of every villager, the proximity of fragile structures, and the trajectories required to maximize impact while minimizing unintended damage. Every variable was accounted for, and she felt the surge of readiness coursing through her veins. Her gaze returned to the main battlefield. Soldiers, emboldened by temporary reprieve, were advancing once more. She weighed the timing. If she acted now, the first explosion would hit as the enemy's formation reached the natural choke points, magnifying the effect. If she delayed, they could adjust, restoring some semblance of order. The calculation was made in a heartbeat. Decision reached. She would act. Hesitation was no longer an option. The moment demanded audacity, precision, and absolute control. With a decisive motion, she picked up the first explosive bolt, loading it with meticulous care. The crossbow felt alive in her hands, a perfect extension of her mind and body. Every fiber of her being focused on the moment ahead. She glanced briefly at her allies, signaling them silently to hold position and trust her lead. They complied instinctively, inspired by her courage, understanding that the next actions could change everything. She exhaled, steadying her aim, centering herself in the eye of the impending storm. The village held its collective breath. Time seemed to stretch, each second charged with anticipation and danger. The girl's hands were steady, her eyes locked on the first target, the center of the enemy's advancing formation. She had calculated the distance, wind, angle, and force required for maximum effect. Every detail, every nuance, every tiny variable had been anticipated and incorporated into her plan. She was ready. The decision was made. There was no turning back. The explosive bolts, harbingers of chaos and panic, would soon redefine the battlefield. The girl's fingers tightened on the crossbow, her pulse synchronized with the rhythm of the approaching enemy. The first explosive bolt was ready, its deadly potential held in careful balance between precision and chaos. She exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline sharpen her focus instead of clouding it. The battlefield had grown chaotic already, but she knew this moment would redefine everything. One strike, perfectly timed, would shatter the enemy's confidence and sow panic that would ripple through their ranks. Around her, the villagers froze, sensing something monumental was about to unfold. She aimed at the center of the enemy formation, where the officers and standards clustered, the heart of their confidence. The bolt's weight felt heavier than its mass alone. It carried the promise of chaos, the weight of responsibility, and the calculated risk that could change the tide of battle. She remembered her training, her countless simulations of timing, trajectory, and reaction, all culminating in this precise instant. Every muscle coiled, every nerve attuned. She released the bolt with a sharp, fluid motion, and it soared through the air, a harbinger of impending chaos. The bolt struck its target with an explosive thunder that shattered the rhythm of the enemy's advance. The sound ripped across the battlefield, deafening and disorienting, followed by smoke, debris, and the startled cries of soldiers. Horses reared violently, trampling comrades and toppling barricades, while men collided in confusion. Officers shouted commands that went unheeded, their attempts to restore order drowned in the chaos they could not yet comprehend. The girl's eyes tracked the resulting disarray, noting every faltering soldier, every diverted charge, every sign of hesitation that her strike had caused. The enemy panicked almost instantly. Confidence evaporated under the weight of unexpected destruction. Soldiers scattered, some fleeing instinctively, others freezing in indecision. The initial coordination that had once been their strength was fractured, replaced by fear and uncertainty. The girl moved through the chaos like a predator, firing another explosive bolt into the advancing flanks. Each detonation was timed to exploit weaknesses, to disrupt formations, and to magnify panic. By the time the second bolt struck, the enemy's carefully structured advance had become a fragmented, stumbling horde. She could see the ripple effect spreading outward. Soldiers who had not yet experienced the explosions stopped mid-stride, scanning in fear for the next strike. Horses, startled by the sudden destruction, bolted through the ranks, trampling anyone in their path. Officers struggled to regain authority, but the psychological impact of the girl's calculated assault was immediate and profound. She had not only inflicted physical damage, but had dismantled their mental composure. Panic, once seated, spread faster than any weapon she could deploy, and the battlefield became a theater of controlled chaos. Amid the storm, the villagers reacted with a mix of awe and renewed courage. Seeing the enemy falter, they pressed forward with newfound determination. Men who had been hesitant swung axes and spears with precision. Women hurled rocks and overturned carts to block the enemy's advance. And even the children found small ways to assist, moving supplies and messages through the commotion. Each action, no matter how minor, was amplified by the girl's leadership. She had turned fear into motivation, disarray into opportunity, and the villagers' morale soared as the enemy staggered under the combined force of chaos and courage. The girl's movements were fluid, deliberate, and almost predatory. She did not linger where danger was greatest, but struck with precision, retreating to positions where she could maintain control and observe the unfolding battlefield. Another explosive bolt sailed through the air, striking the enemy's rear guard and toppling their supply lines. The resulting fires and smoke further obscured the battlefield, magnifying confusion. Soldiers collided, horses reared, and officers shouted orders that were ignored, misheard, or drowned in chaos. Each detonation reinforced her strategic dominance, each strike a calculated step toward total disruption. A wave of terror spread through the enemy ranks. Confidence was now replaced with hesitation. hesitation with fear, and fear with outright panic. Soldiers stumbled, tripped, or ran blindly, unable to follow orders. The girl adjusted her aim continuously, firing bolts where the enemy appeared to regain composure, ensuring the momentum remained entirely in her control. Her instincts and calculations worked in perfect harmony. She moved not only to attack, but to manipulate the battlefield psychologically, striking fear precisely where it would multiply most effectively. The cacophony was nearly overwhelming. Explosions, screams, and the chaos of panicked soldiers filled the air. Smoke twisted in irregular plumes, partially obscuring the battlefield. Amid it all, the girl remained a calm, focused center. She tracked the impact of each explosive bolt, observing the ripple of panic, and calculated her next move accordingly. She had anticipated the enemy's reactions, and each prediction had come to fruition. Their cohesion was gone, replaced by scattered, frightened units struggling to survive against an adversary whose skill and audacity seemed limitless. Her allies capitalized immediately. Men surged forward, breaking weakened lines, while women used the chaos to flank and harass, disrupting command structures further. Villagers who had hesitated now fought with boldness, their fear replaced by the inspiration of witnessing a decisive, unstoppable force in action. Even small obstacles, a toppled cart, a stray boulder, were utilized strategically under her direction, maximizing the disarray within enemy ranks. The girl's combination of foresight, speed, and decisive action had transformed the battlefield from a contest of strength into a war of psychological dominance. Another bolt flew, striking near a concentration of enemy officers. The resulting explosion caused horses to bolt, officers to fall, and soldiers to scatter in confusion. The timing was perfect, coinciding with a charge from the villagers that she had silently orchestrated. Panic now spread uncontrollably. The enemy's formation dissolved entirely, replaced by a chaotic, panicked mass struggling to maintain cohesion. What had once been a confident, organized force was now a fragmented mob. Every bolt the girl fired, every movement she directed, amplified the effect, demonstrating the perfect synergy between strategy, courage, and fear. Even amidst the chaos, the girl remained acutely aware of her surroundings. She tracked her allies' positions, ensuring that no one was endangered unnecessarily by the explosions. Her aim and timing accounted for friend and foe alike, emphasizing precision over recklessness. She had trained for this moment extensively. Her every thought, movement, and decision was calibrated for maximum effectiveness. She was not simply a fighter. She was a master of battlefield manipulation, turning physical destruction into psychological dominance and ensuring the enemy could neither recover nor regroup effectively. The enemy's retreat began, slow at first, then accelerating as panic spread uncontrollably. Officers attempted to rally, but the psychological damage was irreversible. Horses fled, soldiers stumbled over fallen comrades, and the once proud banners of discipline and order lay in ruin. The girl had transformed their confidence into fear, their planning into chaos, and their advance into retreat. Her explosive bolts were not merely weapons, they were instruments of control, shaping the battlefield to her will and amplifying the courage of those she led. The villagers cheered as they observed the enemy's faltering retreat. Relief, excitement, and newfound courage surged through them, transforming hesitation into action. The girl, though still vigilant, allowed herself a brief, satisfied glance. Her plan had succeeded beyond expectation. The explosive bolts had achieved exactly what she had intended. They had shattered the enemy's confidence, disrupted formations, and created a cascading effect of panic that ensured the village could now press its advantage. Every detail, every timing, every strategic calculation had aligned perfectly. Amid the smoke and ruin, the girl surveyed the battlefield. The enemy was no longer a disciplined force, but a chaotic horde, scattering in fear across the open fields. Her allies moved with precision, taking advantage of every opening she had created. Villagers who had been terrified mere hours before now fought with focus, bravery, and determination, guided by her leadership. The battlefield had been transformed. Fear had become a weapon, chaos a tool, and courage a force multiplied by strategic brilliance. Even as the adrenaline faded slightly, the girl remained alert. She knew that battles were not won by a single action, and that vigilance was essential to secure lasting victory. The enemy's retreat, while decisive, could still be reversed if allowed opportunity. She prepared herself mentally for continued engagement, adjusting positions, scanning for hidden threats, and coordinating her allies to maintain pressure. The explosive bolts had shifted the balance, but the fight was not yet over. Every moment demanded focus, courage, and precision. For a brief moment, the battlefield was silent, except for the cries of the fleeing enemy and the murmurs of her allies. Smoke hung low, twisting in irregular columns, partially obscuring the chaos below. The girl lowered her crossbow slightly, but remained poised. Her eyes swept the terrain, calculating, anticipating, and preparing for the next stage of battle. She had unleashed the shock, shattered the enemy's confidence, and transformed hesitation into panic. The stage was set for the next move, the consolidation of victory, and the ultimate test of courage, and strategy. The battlefield had shifted dramatically. The enemy, once a disciplined, confident force, was now fragmented and disoriented, scattering in every direction. Smoke hung low over the village outskirts, curling around toppled horses and abandoned weapons, obscuring vision and amplifying confusion. Amid the chaos, the girl moved like a calm eye within a storm, her crossbow ready, eyes scanning every movement, every twitch, every potential threat. The first wave of panic she had orchestrated had shattered their confidence, but now she needed to convert that momentary advantage into a decisive, lasting advantage. Her mind worked faster than the soldiers' reactions. The enemy's retreat, though initially chaotic, could stabilize if allowed. She recognized patterns even in disorder: the staggered formations, soldiers regrouping behind cover, officers attempting to restore command. Timing was critical. She could not simply rely on fear. She needed to guide her allies' actions, create opportunities, and maintain pressure while minimizing risk. Every movement, every arrow fired, every explosive bolt deployed had been part of this larger strategy. Now, the second phase would determine whether victory would truly be theirs. The villagers, emboldened by the girl's actions, began pressing forward. Men who had been hiding now took deliberate positions, wielding crude weapons with newfound determination. Women coordinated to harass and block enemy movements, throwing projectiles and overturning carts to create barriers. Children moved with care, relaying messages and supplies to maintain communication and support the defensive line. The girls signaled their actions subtly, using gestures, head tilts, and glances. She did not need to shout commands. Her presence and prior demonstrations of precision and courage spoke louder than any words. A small contingent of enemy soldiers attempted to regroup near the center of the village, hoping to reclaim order and inspire confidence. A girl anticipated their move. She aimed her crossbow, firing a well-timed explosive bolt that struck the ground just ahead of them. The blast threw dirt and debris into their faces, unbalancing horses and soldiers alike. Panic rippled through their ranks once more. Their confidence, already fragile, crumbled entirely. Officers shouted in vain, attempting to restore cohesion, but their commands were drowned out by chaos. Horses bolted, soldiers collided, and momentum shifted irrevocably toward the girl and her allies. She moved swiftly, guiding the villagers to exploit the openings she had created. A group of men charged through a narrow gap between toppled barricades, cutting off a small enemy flank. Women threw rocks and overturned carts, further restricting movement and creating impromptu traps. Every action was synchronized, every movement deliberate, maximizing the effect of the chaos she had sown. The battlefield, once dominated by enemy confidence and order, was now a theater of controlled disruption, with the girl as its master conductor. From her vantage point, she could see the enemy's panic spreading outward like wildfire. Soldiers stumbled over fallen comrades, officers struggled to command, and horses bolted uncontrollably. The rhythm of their advance had dissolved, replaced by hesitation and fear. She pressed her advantage, firing another explosive bolt into the rear guard, ensuring that retreat became disorganized and total. Each shot was precise, calculated not only for physical impact, but for its psychological effect. Confidence was gone. Hesitation reigned. The enemy's cohesion had evaporated, and the girl's strategy now dominated the battlefield. Amid the chaos, the villagers' morale soared. Witnessing the enemy's disorder and the girl's skill emboldened them beyond measure. Those who had been afraid now moved with courage, seizing opportunities to strike, block, and maneuver. Men used their weapons with precision, guided by the openings she created. Women coordinated in harassment, maintaining pressure on retreating soldiers. Children maintained communication, ensuring coordination and resource movement. The girl's leadership had turned panic into purpose, fear into courage, and confusion into strategic advantage. The enemy's retreat accelerated. Some attempted to flee toward open fields, only to be blocked by barricades and obstacles the villagers had created under the girl's guidance. Others tried to regroup behind remaining forces, but the chaos had spread too far. Horses tripped over debris, soldiers collided, and officers shouted orders that were ignored or misinterpreted. Every step forward was fraught with danger, and the girl ensured that each opening was exploited. She was not simply defending the village. She was transforming the battlefield into a trap from which escape was increasingly difficult. A small detachment of enemy officers attempted to mount a counteroffensive, hoping to stabilize the lines and regain control. The girl's eyes narrowed, calculating angles, distances, and timing. She fired another explosive bolt into their midst, the blast throwing debris and confusion across their ranks. Panic spread again, compounded by the villagers' coordinated strikes. The officers' attempts to assert control were futile. Their confidence was shattered, their authority questioned by soldiers who had begun to doubt their leadership. Momentum had irrevocably shifted, and the girl's strategic brilliance dictated the pace of battle. Every movement she made was deliberate. She did not linger in exposed positions, but struck precisely, retreating to vantage points where she could survey the battlefield and maintain control. Her crossbow fired bolts with fluid precision, each one timed to reinforce panic and disrupt attempts at cohesion. She observed the enemy's reactions carefully, adjusting her tactics in real time. Her actions were both offensive and defensive, ensuring that every opportunity for her allies was maximized while minimizing their risk. The battlefield had become a complex chessboard, with every piece moving according to her design. The villagers pressed their advantage. Men moved decisively through weakened enemy formations, cutting off retreat paths. Women coordinated harassment attacks, striking from concealed positions and using obstacles to create further disorder. Children maintained logistical support, ensuring supplies and communication flowed uninterrupted. The girl guided these movements with subtle signals, gestures, and eye contact. Her leadership amplified their effectiveness, turning individual acts of courage into a collective force capable of overwhelming even the remnants of the enemy's strength. The enemy, now thoroughly disoriented, struggled to regroup. Some fled in panic, abandoning equipment and comrades. Others attempted to rally, but were met with further disruption from explosive bolts and coordinated village attacks. The girl calculated every step, ensuring that momentum remained in her favor. She did not allow the enemy time to recover. Hesitation would have been enough to reverse the tide. Her strategy relied on sustained pressure, precision strikes, and psychological domination, and she executed it flawlessly. As the sun climbed higher, the village began to feel the weight of victory. Smoke from small fires and explosions hung in the air, mixing with dust and the acrid scent of disruption. The enemy's retreat was complete in some sectors, hesitant in others, but universally disordered. Villagers, emboldened and confident, continued to press forward under the girl's guidance, ensuring that no opportunity for decisive advantage was missed. The battlefield had been transformed from a place of fear and danger into a landscape of strategic mastery, where the girl's decisions dictated the flow of events. For a brief moment, she paused to assess the situation. The enemy had lost cohesion, confidence, and momentum. The villagers were organized, inspired, and capable of sustaining pressure. Her explosive bolts had accomplished their purpose, not only physically, but psychologically. Panic had replaced discipline, hesitation had replaced confidence, and disarray had replaced order. Yet she remained vigilant, aware that battles are won, not by a single moment, but by sustained dominance. She repositioned herself, scanning the battlefield, ready to respond to any signs of counterattack. The tide had turned completely. Where once the enemy had advanced with confidence, they now retreated in chaos. Villagers, emboldened by the girl's leadership, maintained pressure, exploiting every weakness, every hesitation, and every moment of disorder. The battlefield was no longer contested. It was dictated by her strategy, her precision, and her unwavering courage. She had not only defended the village, but transformed fear, chaos, and disorder into instruments of victory. The girl's eyes swept across the battlefield, one last time before moving forward. Her allies followed her lead, striking decisively at disorganized enemy remnants, securing positions, and ensuring that the threat could no longer regroup. The village, once on the brink of destruction, was now a fortress defended by courage, strategy, and the decisive actions of one battle-hardened girl. The enemy's advance had been stopped, their confidence shattered, and their retreat dominated by calculated disruption. The battlefield, though still chaotic, had been reshaped entirely. The girl's strategy had turned initial fear into opportunity, panic into advantage, and hesitation into control. Every explosive bolt, every calculated strike, and every subtle signal had contributed to this transformation. The tide had turned, and the village, once on the brink of defeat, now stood poised for decisive victory. The battlefield had been transformed. What had once been a disciplined enemy force had devolved into a panicked, disorganized mass, scattering in confusion. Smoke, dust, and the acrid scent of explosives filled the air, mingling with the cries of soldiers, the shouts of officers, and the triumphant voices of villagers pressing their advantage. Yet the girl did not slow. She had seen how battles could turn even in the final moments. Hesitation now could squander the opportunity she had so carefully created. The final push required precision, leadership, and courage more than brute force. She crouched behind a partially collapsed wall, surveying the battlefield. Enemy soldiers clambered over toppled carts, tripped on debris, and collided with each other in the chaos she had orchestrated. Horses bolted in every direction, some dragging riders helplessly across the ground. Officers struggled to reassert command, shouting over the din, but the psychological damage was irreversible. Their confidence was broken, replaced by fear, and hesitation had become their guiding principle. The girl's mind raced, calculating the next sequence of actions to secure total victory. The villagers, emboldened by her leadership, began to press forward. Men, wielding spears, axes, and crude swords, advanced with determination, cutting off escape routes and seizing control of critical areas. Women hurled rocks, overturned carts, and used fire to block passages, further constraining enemy movements. Children, though still cautious, moved supplies, relayed messages, and maintained lines of communication. Every action was synchronized through subtle gestures, eye contact, and the example set by the girl. The battlefield had become a coordinated, dynamic system under her command. She raised her crossbow, scanning for remaining concentrations of enemy resistance. A small contingent of soldiers had regrouped near the northern flank, attempting to mount a final counteroffensive. Their approach was deliberate, but slow, their fear evident in every hesitant step. The girl calculated angles, distances, and timing, selecting her next explosive bolt. She aimed not only to disrupt physically, but to reinforce the psychological collapse she had engineered. Every shot was a weapon of strategy, amplifying panic and uncertainty. She released the bolt, and the resulting explosion threw enemy soldiers into chaos once more. The northern flank erupted in disorder. Horses reared violently, soldiers scrambled for cover, and officers attempted futilely to rally their forces. Panic spread like wildfire through their ranks, accelerated by the villagers' coordinated attacks. Men surged through gaps, cutting off retreat paths and preventing regrouping. Women exploited every opening, harassing and disorienting with precision. The girl moved fluidly among these positions, ensuring that her allies were safe while maximizing the impact on the enemy. Her presence was magnetic, a guiding force in a landscape dominated by fear and confusion. She directed another wave of villagers to press against a stubborn group, holding a small barricade near the village center. Men swung axes and spears with focused determination, while women threw rocks and overturned carts to block avenues of escape. The girl moved to the rear of this group, firing precise bolts to disrupt any soldiers attempting to flank or counterattack. Her timing was perfect. Every action compounded the panic and hesitation that had already spread through the enemy ranks. What had been a small, resilient formation crumbled under coordinated pressure and the psychological mastery she had cultivated. The enemy's retreat accelerated. Those who had survived the initial chaos now fled in disorder, abandoning equipment, horses, and comrades. Officers shouted commands, but their words fell on deaf ears. Soldiers tripped over debris, collided with one another, and were caught in makeshift barricades. The girl anticipated every move, ensuring that escape routes were limited and that momentum remained firmly in her favor. Her crossbow discharged another explosive bolt into a cluster of enemy troops attempting to flee across an open field, reinforcing panic and creating a controlled corridor of chaos. Amid the turmoil, the villagers' confidence soared. They had witnessed the enemy's repeated failures, the precision and audacity of the girl's strikes, and the tangible results of coordinated action. Fear was replaced by courage, hesitation by determination. They pressed forward with purpose, exploiting every weakness, pursuing retreating soldiers, and securing key areas of the village. The battlefield had become an instrument of strategy, manipulated expertly by the girl's leadership. Every success reinforced their resolve and magnified the effect of her previous actions. A final wave of enemy resistance gathered near a small ridge on the village's outskirts. The soldiers, desperate and cornered, attempted to mount a coordinated stand. The girl observed carefully, noting their positioning, vulnerabilities, and likely reactions. Timing was everything. She aimed a well-placed explosive bolt at the center of this group, releasing it with perfect precision. The resulting detonation threw debris, startled horses, and created panic within the ranks. Officers fell, soldiers scattered, and momentum shifted decisively. The final stand had collapsed before it could fully form. The girl's allies surged forward to exploit the opening. Men engaged remaining soldiers, cutting off retreat paths and securing key positions. Women coordinated harassment attacks, ensuring that scattered resistance could not regroup. Children maintained communication and logistics, reinforcing coordination among the villagers. Every action reinforced the momentum she had created, ensuring that the enemy could no longer recover. The battlefield, once contested, now tilted entirely in favor of her side. Victory was within reach, and the girl maintained calm vigilance, directing the final stages with precision. The enemy's remnants began a disorganized, panicked flight across open terrain. Horses bolted uncontrollably, soldiers stumbled over debris, and officers shouted futilely. Every attempt at order was crushed by the psychological impact of repeated explosive strikes and coordinated attacks. The girl anticipated escape routes, positioning her crossbow for one final volley to maintain pressure and prevent regrouping. Each shot reinforced the collapse of morale, amplifying fear and disarray. Her leadership, skill, and timing had transformed initial chaos into an unstoppable wave of controlled dominance. Amid the chaos, the girl did not pause. She moved fluidly among her allies, providing guidance, reassurance, and signals to maximize their effectiveness. Villagers followed instinctively, trusting her judgment and experience. Men pressed forward with determination, women harassed and blocked, and children maintained communication. Every coordinated action was magnified by her presence, amplifying effectiveness and ensuring that no opportunity for decisive advantage was lost. The final push was not just a physical assault. It was a psychological and strategic operation, executed flawlessly. As the sun climbed higher, the last pockets of enemy resistance crumbled. Soldiers fled in every direction, leaving equipment, horses, and banners behind. Panic had replaced confidence, chaos had replaced order, and hesitation had replaced discipline. The girl's combination of explosive precision, strategic leadership, and psychological manipulation had transformed the battlefield entirely. Villagers, once terrified, now moved with courage, precision, and unity, securing positions and consolidating the hard-won advantage. For a brief moment, the girl paused to survey the scene. Smoke curled over toppled barricades, debris littered the ground, and the enemy's retreat stretched across the horizon. Her allies were organized, inspired, and capable of maintaining control. The battlefield, though still chaotic, had been decisively transformed. Fear had been wielded as a weapon, panic as a tool, and courage amplified through coordinated leadership. The girl had not merely defended the village. She had reshaped the entire engagement, securing victory through audacity, precision, and foresight. The final push was complete. The enemy was routed, the village secured, and the villagers had been transformed by the experience. From fear and desperation had emerged courage, unity, and confidence. The girl's crossbow, her explosive bolts, and her leadership had created a decisive, irreversible shift. The battlefield bore witness not only to tactical brilliance, but to the power of psychological mastery, courage under pressure, and calculated decisiveness. Victory was theirs, hard-won and absolute, and the stage was set for the final reckoning. The battlefield fell silent, save for the distant clatter of retreating soldiers and the occasional whinny of a startled horse. Smoke and dust hung thick in the air, mingling with the metallic scent of weaponry and the acrid sting of explosives. The girl lowered her crossbow, her muscles aching from hours of relentless action, yet her mind remained alert, scanning the horizon for any remaining threats. Victory had been achieved, but its significance extended far beyond the immediate triumph. The village, once on the brink of destruction, now stood resilient, transformed by courage, strategy, and unity. Villagers emerged from hiding, their faces smeared with soot, sweat, and grime. but their eyes shone with determination and relief. Men straightened, gripping weapons with renewed confidence, while women and children cautiously stepped forward, eager to assist in securing their homes. The girl moved among them, offering nods, gestures, and silent reassurances. She did not boast, for her focus had never been personal glory. Every action she had taken, every explosive bolt fired, had been with a single purpose: to protect, inspire, and ensure the survival of her people. The remnants of the enemy were scattered, some fleeing beyond sight, others immobilized or trapped by the chaotic aftermath. Equipment lay abandoned, broken swords, shattered shields, and toppled banners littered the ground. Horses, once a symbol of the enemy's disciplined cavalry, now wandered erratically, adding to the disarray. The psychological blow had been decisive. Confidence had been replaced by fear, coordination replaced by confusion, and discipline replaced by hesitation. The girl's mastery of timing, strategy, and psychological warfare had turned the tide and ensured a conclusive victory. Villagers began to take stock of their surroundings, assessing damage and tending to the wounded. Makeshift medical care was organized, with herbs, bandages, and simple remedies used to stabilize injuries. Though the physical toll was evident, the psychological impact of victory was transformative. Fear and despair had been replaced by courage and empowerment. The villagers who had once doubted their ability to resist now stood emboldened, their unity strengthened by the girl's leadership and the tangible results of coordinated action. Children ran through the streets, retrieving discarded weapons and supplies, their small acts contributing to the rebuilding effort. Women cleared debris, salvaging what they could, while men organized defenses and ensured that no lingering threats remained. The village, though battered, was alive with activity and a renewed sense of purpose. The girl moved through the scene with quiet vigilance, observing, directing, and ensuring that her allies' hard-won advantage was maintained. Her presence alone inspired confidence and order amidst lingering chaos. The enemy's officers, captured or forced to surrender, were brought forward under careful guard. The villagers, guided by the girl's calm authority, treated them with a measured discipline. No unnecessary cruelty was inflicted. The purpose was not revenge, but security and the assertion of control. The psychological dominance she had established extended into this phase, ensuring that the enemy understood the consequences of aggression while witnessing this discipline and unity of those they had sought to subdue. Her leadership was both firm and humane, earning respect even from those who had opposed her. As evening approached, the village gathered in a central square, the air thick with smoke and the lingering tension of battle. The girl stood at the center, surveying the faces around her. Relief, pride, and gratitude were evident in every expression. She allowed herself a brief moment of acknowledgement, a nod, a glance, a silent affirmation of their resilience and courage. Words were unnecessary. Her actions had already spoken louder than any speech could. The villagers understood the depth of her sacrifice, skill, and leadership. They had witnessed courage made manifest, and it had inspired them beyond measure. The aftermath of the battle was a time of reflection. Villagers recounted the events, sharing stories of individual bravery, coordinated attacks, and the decisive moments that had shifted the tide. The girl listened, noting patterns of success and areas for improvement, aware that future threats could arise at any moment. Her mind, though weary, remained sharp and analytical. She understood that victory in battle was not an endpoint, but a lesson, an opportunity to fortify, to train, and to prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. Word of the girl's actions spread quickly beyond the village, carried by travelers, messengers, and those who had witnessed the extraordinary events. Her deeds became the subject of conversation, admiration, and inspiration throughout neighboring communities. She had demonstrated not only extraordinary skill, with her crossbow and explosive bolts, but also unparalleled strategic insight, psychological mastery, and the ability to inspire courage in others. The story of the girl who had turned panic into victory traveled far and wide, leaving a legacy that would endure for generations. The girl herself remained humble, refusing accolades or personal recognition. Her focus was always on the people she protected, the strategies she executed, and the lessons she imparted through action. In the days that followed, she worked tirelessly to fortify the village, train villagers in defensive techniques, and ensure that the psychological resilience they had gained was preserved. Victory was not only measured in survival, but in the empowerment and preparedness of those who now looked to her for guidance. As night fell, the village settled into an uneasy calm. Fires smoldered in the distance, illuminating the ruins of the battlefield, while villagers tended to the wounded and secured the perimeters. The girl walked through the village, observing, ensuring, and reflecting. The weight of responsibility rested heavily on her shoulders, yet she bore it with quiet strength. The battle had been won, but the work of securing, rebuilding, and preparing for the future was only beginning. Her legacy would be measured not just in victory, but in the enduring courage, unity, and resilience she had instilled. In the months and years that followed, the village flourished. Stories of the girl's courage became legend, recounted in hushed tones by children, spoken with admiration by adults, and studied by warriors who sought to understand the blend of skill, strategy, and psychological mastery that had secured such a remarkable victory. Her leadership had not only saved lives, but transformed an entire community, demonstrating the profound impact of courage, intelligence, and determination. The battlefield, once a site of chaos and fear, became a symbol of resilience. The villagers, trained and inspired, stood vigilant against future threats. They remembered the decisive actions, the explosive bolts, the precision, and the calm leadership of the girl who had turned the tide. Her presence was a living example that courage combined with strategy could overcome even overwhelming odds. The lessons of that day endured, shaping the village's culture, values, and preparedness for generations to come. The girl herself remained ever watchful, her eyes scanning horizons, her mind attuned to threats and opportunities alike. Though the battle was over, her vigilance never wavered. She continued to lead, teach, and protect, a steadfast guardian whose legend was grounded in real action, tactical brilliance, and the unwavering courage to act when others hesitated. Her legacy was not simply a story of victory, but a living testament to the power of intelligence, strategy, and the human spirit when combined in the crucible of adversity. And so, the village endured, fortified not only by walls and weapons, but by the indomitable courage of one battle-hardened girl. Her story would be remembered, taught, and revered, a beacon of hope and inspiration for all who faced overwhelming odds. She had transformed fear into action, chaos into strategy, and hesitation into courage. The battlefield, though scarred and battered, stood as a testament to the enduring power of leadership, precision, and the unyielding spirit of a single individual who dared to shape the course of events and turn destiny in favor of those who believed in her.